Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Johnson, Fiscal Sponsorship and Communications Manager at Southeast Uplift. Thank you for joining us today. I want to mention that we do have a few more trainings coming up, including next Wednesday, event planning, a step-by-step guide with Diane, our presenter today. And then in April, we'll have some more on meeting facilitation skills and decision-making models. And in May, we'll have a session on taxes for domestic nonprofit corporations and 501c3s. So feel free to follow us on social or tune in, join our e-newsletter list if you'd like to check those out. Today's session on managing volunteers, how to recruit and retain them, will be presented by Diane L. Odeh. The session is being recorded and will be shared. You're welcome to have your camera on or off, whatever is most comfortable for you. We have enabled captions, and if you have any additional access needs, feel free to post those in the chat. Now I'm going to hand the mic over to our presenter, Diane, to introduce herself.
Thanks, Lindsay. So yeah, I'm Diane. You may be wondering why am I talking to you today? I'll get into that in a second. But yeah, we're here to talk about volunteer management, and I wanted to just get a quick idea of who's in the room. So essentially what kinds of organizations we're working with today to help me kind of with the presentation. So you can either type in chat or tell me who you are. But yeah, let's start with Molly, since you're unmuted.
Okay.
You like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm with Sunnyside East Village, and we're a new village in the Village Northwest network of villages, and we're in the development phase. So right now we need volunteers to help us start up our organization. And then after we're ready to launch, then we'll need even more volunteers, people to provide services to our members.
Gotcha.
So it's a very heavily volunteer-oriented organization.
Yep, sounds like it. I've worked with those before, fully volunteer-run organizations.
Yes.
Before. Quite the daunting task. All right, Tracy.
I'm actually here because of Jane Foreman, who's right there.
Oh, cool.
And it's the same group, Villages Northwest. And I wanted to start one for Troutdale. Jane was starting one for Gresham, and population wasn't big enough in our area. So we are now working with Jane.
Great. Hi, Jane.
Hi. I'll just ditto exactly what Molly said. Nice to see you, Molly.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Except we're with, she's in Sunnyside East, and we're a developing village in Gresham, Troutdale, Wood Village, and Fairview.
Great. Thank you, Jane. And thank you, Joanne. All right, Rebecca, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Rebecca Banky, and I'm on the board of the Kearns Neighborhood Association. So we're just trying to get things moving.
Great. Cool. Thanks, Rebecca. Deborah or Morgan, are you there?
Hi, this is Morgan. Sorry, I started my camera and it crashed my Zoom, so I'm going to leave it off for a little bit. But I am the volunteer coordinator for Raphael House of Portland.
Oh.
Yeah, and I'm new to position, so was happy to see your training come up. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, great. I worked with someone in the nonprofit institute who was working with Raphael House. Lindsay something, I think. I'd have to figure.
Yeah, Lindsay Bold.
Yes, yeah. Lindsay Bold. I worked with her on the program evaluation for Raphael House.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. Good to see you.
Thanks.
Deborah.
Hello, trying to wrangle the animals and get started with this meeting. So I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm came on board with the soon-to-be Villages Northwest in maybe upriver with Troutdale and Gresham with Jane and Tracy. So I'm just kind of getting my feet wet.
Very cool. Thank you,
Jumping
Deborah.
in with
So it sounds like in the room we have kind of a wide variety of like folks organizations, or kind of a wider variety of volunteer types. So this training will kind of be more general, but if you do have specific questions, feel free to ask them throughout. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just 1 second. Okay. Move that out of the way. All right. So thank you for coming to the volunteer management training put on by Southeast Uplift today. I'm Diane Odeh, like Lindsay said. And you may be wondering, why am I talking to you today about volunteer management? So I'm currently a PhD candidate at Portland State University. My dissertation topic is focusing on community engagement, values, and motivations, specifically around neighborhood association involvement, but I am doing a lot of research on general volunteer motivations and values within that. I'm also a learning mentor and instructor for the nonprofit institute out of Portland State University. So we focus a lot on, in that I work on the program evaluation certificate program, like I just briefly mentioned. I'm also a board member for 2 nonprofit organizations. So I'm a volunteer myself, and I'm also a social equity consultant and volunteer for Neighbors West Northwest. So I both learn about volunteers, but I'm also a volunteer myself. So I like to let people know what they're getting into. So today we're going to start by talking about types of volunteers. So essentially, what kinds of volunteers are out there. Then we're going to get into volunteer preferences and motivations. The logic behind this is that understanding what motivates people to volunteer will help you with how you recruit people to your organization. And then from there, we're going to get into discussing volunteer recruitment best practices. So essentially, what are the elements of good recruitment? And once you get your volunteers in the door, how do you retain them? So that's when we'll get into the retention of volunteers. So essentially, how do you keep your volunteers engaged? How do you stay in touch with them? So let's get into it. All right. So volunteers types, let's talk about it. So there are broadly 3 types of volunteers when it comes to duration. So you have people who prefer to be one-time volunteers. So those are people who will volunteer to do an annual event. They'll volunteer to do like a manual task. So like the people who will show up to like build a house or paint like a dining area or something for an organization. So they prefer to just do quick one and done type of volunteering. Then you have your more short-term volunteers. So those would be people who are willing to engage for a longer amount of time, but not necessarily are interested in being a long-term volunteer. So short-term volunteers tend to be drawn to opportunities where there's like kind of a time limit on what they're doing. So for instance, serving a term on a board or committee where they know that there's an endpoint, joining a time limited task force, or engaging in the planning of an event. So and what I mean by that is, they say you have an event, so they'll be on like a committee to help you plan that event, and they'll show up to those meetings, they'll help with the event, but when that's done, they don't really sustain their involvement with the organization. And they may continue with that same event annually, but they're not going to be really a long-term volunteer. So examples of long-term volunteers include board membership. So people who are involved longer term with organizational boards. And they also will do sustained involvement in events and other activities. So they're the kinds of folks who are always around, who are willing to show up multiple times within a month to help out with stuff. There are some organizations that are fully volunteer run, and you all just mentioned some. An example of one I worked with recently is the Scappoose Senior Citizens and Community Center, and they're fully volunteer run with the exception of one staff who works half-time. And so they are in their daily operating the organization. So that's where you would find your longer term volunteers. So I was thinking about the types, the groups of volunteers that exist in in the world. And so I'm sure you all could add to this list. But I'm really thinking, when I was thinking about what are kind of common groups of volunteers, one group that came up a lot in my head was students. So that could be students who are in public school, well, any kind of school, who are under 18, and those in college. So I personally am teaching college students right now about civic engagement and volunteerism. And so I have a direct eye on what's motivating them, because they're all doing volunteerism projects. There's also a very common volunteer group are retirees. So essentially people who are 50 and above. So people with maybe at the end stage of their careers, or retired already. There's also families with children. So families who want to do volunteering, and also working professionals. So feel free to let me know who did I miss in this group. This isn't an exhaustive list, so feel free to let me know, who am I missing? You could either type it in the chat or tell me. If you think of anybody, let me know, because I really want to make sure that we're incorporating. Now, other people who I thought about could be just general individuals who want to get engaged, but hopefully this is an exhaustive list, like I said, so this can apply to multiple types of the stuff I'm about to get into will apply to multiple groups, but these are just kinds of pools of groups of volunteers I could think of. Okay, Morgan, that's a great example. So people who are new to town, and we'll get into that in a second. I think that's a fantastic example. That's how I got involved, actually. I got involved with Neighbors West Northwest because I was new to town and I wanted to, I initially got involved with my neighborhood association because of that. Yeah, and Joanne says neighbors. Yeah, great examples. So when we talk about preferences and motivations, there are people who people who have different preferences when it comes to volunteering. So in the civic engagement world, there's something called a continuum of service. So there's people who love to do direct service, meaning they want that direct interaction with populations. They want to be on the front lines. They want to be out there with people. And then there's people who do more what we call indirect service. So they prefer to be behind the scenes. They still get a lot of satisfaction from their volunteerism, but they're not necessarily going to be the same people who are on the front lines directly interacting with populations, so clients of organizations, things like that. So when we think about what motivates people to be involved, the motivations fall into two main buckets. So the first is material motivations, and the second is non-material motivations. So material motivations, these are very physical, tangible benefits of volunteerism. So it's someone who derives a lot of benefits that are easily seen to that person. So that's what really motivates them. And then when there's non-material, and we're going to get more into what these different what motivations fall under each one of these, but non-material describes motivations that aren't as easily seen, but it's benefits that the volunteer derives from the experience of volunteering. So we're going to start with material motivations. So there's a vein of nonprofit literature, volunteerism-based literature that looks at the material motivations of why people want to be involved in an organization. So these four, I would say, describe a lot of what that literature says when it comes to material. So first off, career-related motivations. So that people who are motivated by career-related motivations, they may want to volunteer because they're developing skills and experience for a career that they're seeking. So for instance, I had somebody who wants to be the director of a nonprofit. So they started volunteering with a nonprofit so they could gain those skills and experience to pivot into that career. Also, there are, for some positions, it's in some research, it's been reported that people who occupy higher level, like executive positions in organizations, have a either a spoken or unspoken expectation that they should be involved in volunteerism. So in some cases, you have to report on how you're involved with your community. There's also some organizations, some industries that really actually encourage it by giving people days off to volunteer. So that all falls under the career-related motivations. So there's also school-related motivations. So Portland State University actually has a host of classes that have what's known as a service learning requirement. That also can be the case if students are in K through 12, that they may be involved in clubs or different groups that have requirements for engaging in service. Other material motivations. So this one is how I joined my neighborhood association, affiliation. So people like to see volunteerism as a form of networking and building social capital. So in essence, building social capital is the act of growing out your network. So a lot of neighborhood association literature really focuses on this particular motivation. So a lot of people in neighborhoods, who are neighbors and neighborhood associations, like to engage because they like to keep that network of their community strong. And then there's also the motivation of seeing the direct impact of your service, of your volunteerism. So seeing the immediate improvements of an action that you're doing. So you know, handing out food to people and seeing their reaction, building a house, repairing something. Those are all immediate improvements that a volunteer can see, and that's what motivates them to be involved. Now, when you get into non-material motivations, there's three primary motivations that fall under a non-material motivation. So the first is belief. So that generally relates to an organization's mission aligning with personal values. So in my case, I personally feel very passionate about the topic of houselessness and about food insecurity. So those beliefs, those values are what caused me to want to volunteer with the Downtown Neighborhood Association Houseless and Homeless team, and what motivates me to be involved with the Oregon Food Bank. The second type of non-material motivation is esteem. So that's feelings of accomplishment, feelings of empowerment. So essentially, it feels good to do good, and I feel good about myself when I'm helping my community. And then finally, there's a sense of obligation. So some people really are motivated by feeling like they have a moral duty to their community to contribute. In other words, they'll think, if I don't do it, who will? So that's why some people will remain engaged with volunteerism. So I'm curious, I want to ask the group, which of these resonates most with you? You can go ahead and type it in the chat or say it.
Years ago, I was in exactly the position that you mentioned. I was wanting to make a career transition to the executive director of an environmental nonprofit. So I took a year to volunteer to get myself known in the nonprofit world and the environmental world. Today, my motivations would be very different. They would be the non-material motivations, probably all three of them.
Yeah. And so thank you. You're pointing out that, yeah, our motivations can change depending on what life stage we're in, depending on what career stages we're in. And we'll get into what motivates the different types of groups I identified. All right. And there's some in the chat. So great. So Rebecca says esteem and sense of obligation. Tracy says all three have pieces that fit. Morgan says belief and esteem. Joanne says belief and sense of obligation. Molly says belief and esteem. Now, do any of the material motivations appeal to anybody? Just curious.
Well, for me, years ago, yes.
Yeah, years ago, right? Yeah. Ooh, so Deborah is pointing out the free t-shirts, which we're going to get into, but yeah, that is a motivator, right? The perks of being a volunteer. And Rebecca is motivated by direct impact. Yeah, thank you. Yep, great point, Joanne. For high school students, it's a great way. It can be a way to accrue work experience without having that first paid job. Absolutely. So let's get into that. Let's look at what I have. So essentially, I attempted to kind of help us figure out what volunteer groups would be more likely to do what kind of volunteering and what's motivating them to do that volunteering. So students, I'm kind of biased in this. I'm basing this off my experience with my college students, but they're more likely to be one-time volunteers or short-term volunteers, because they have a lot going on, and they let's just be honest, students aren't as organized or able to sustain longer term volunteerism. So generally, based on what I'm finding with my students, a lot of them are driven by career related motivation. So they'll use their volunteerism, like Jane shared, to prepare themselves for a career. And Joanne mentioned it as well. And also they love to see the direct impact of their volunteerism. So they're really more likely to do things like show up for cleanup, a community cleanup, or do food bank distribution, or provide manual labor for something. So they love seeing the fruits of their labor, is what I'm noticing when I'm talking to my students. And if they do something that's more behind the scenes or more sustained, it has to really directly tie into their career. So for instance, I had some students before who were graphic design majors. And so they provided longer term service for an organization, but it was because doing graphic design for that organization was helping them build their portfolio for when they applied to to jobs. Also families with children, those can be kind of anything. I'm just thinking, so I'm kind of basing these groups also off of the neighborhood characteristic profiles. So some areas, some neighborhood associations will have higher amounts of families with children, or they'll have higher amounts of minors or retirees. So that's kind of where I came from with this. So yeah, they can run the gamut, but families are very busy, right? So they might just have time to do a one-time thing or a short-term thing. But they're usually motivated by affiliation or belief. So building out networks, building out their village, if you will, because they have children that they want to get connected to other families in the area and whatnot. So retirees, they're the ones who are most likely to be long-term volunteers. Some main reasons why that happens is because retirees, they're not going to an 8 to 5 job. It used to be 9 to 5, now it's 8 to 5, right? They typically, and I want to be clear, I'm very much generalizing here, but people who are retired typically have more time to do more sustained longer term volunteerism. And so their motivations are mostly related around affiliation. So building their social network, staying connected with people. I had a volunteer once tell me, who's retired, he shared that his wife had died. And if he wasn't volunteering, he would just spend all day at home in bed. So it really gave him a sense of purpose to be around people and social. There's also the sense of obligation, which some of you all shared, and belief, so related to your beliefs. There's also, when you think about professionals, so those are more likely to be long-term volunteers and one-time volunteers. And so when I think of long-term volunteers, you'll see a lot of professionals who will be on boards. So they'll elect to be to have board membership because it looks really good. They can make an impact and they can offer their skills and expertise in that area, or they will show up to one-time events. I mean, and all of these can apply. This isn't like I said, an exhaustive list, but here are some of the motivations, and they're more likely motivated by how that can benefit their career and essentially make them look good. Joanne, are you adding something? Oh, thank you. So Joanne's pointing out, yeah, that with retirees, they're trying to combat loneliness and isolation. Families with children are trying to steer their children through fun to a more positive. Yeah, so they want to have fun, right? And they want to have positive peer interactions and inexpensive childcare, extracurricular activities. Oh, Joanne, I wish you're basically like my co-presenter at this point because you are making such excellent points that we're going to get into. So thank you. Yeah, so let's talk about recruitment. So when we're recruiting volunteers, we have to think about where are we recruiting these volunteers and how are we recruiting volunteers? So some sources where you can recruit volunteers. A lot of people start by getting involved through a personal connection. So that's asking the people in your circle, how, hey, do you want to come do this with me? Also social media. So advertising through social media is a great way to let people know that you have volunteer opportunities. Joanne just mentioned it, but yeah, service organizations. So Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, there's something called like Key Club at schools K through 12. So there's all kinds of service-based organizations that you can call on to help you with things. There's also schools / universities. So oftentimes in K through 12, there's like one person who's in charge of managing the different service groups or like the different activities. So they would be a great connection to make. Also universities. So like I said, there's a lot of classes at, I go to Portland State, but there's so many universities and colleges around the Portland area and the Portland metro and its suburbs, right? That have service requirements for students. So you could partner with classes, you can contact people who run internships, all kinds of stuff. There's also faith-based organizations. So one thing that I've noticed when I ask students to report on volunteerism that they've done, a lot of them report on, well, my church did this thing, so I went and helped with that. So faith-based organizations are a great way to tap into people who have the belief motivation. And also the use of volunteer recruitment websites. So there's one in particular called volunteermatch.org. And I'll show you in a second what that looks like. So some strategies you can use with those sources. Using word of mouth. So like I said, talking to people saying, hey, did you know I've been doing this great thing? Why don't you join me? You can also create flyers and brochures to distribute at these different locations, at schools, at community organizations, at churches. You can also post on online websites such as volunteermatch.org. And this one I kind of just mentioned, but meeting with key connections / conduits. So meeting with key people in organizations. So say you find a list of like Boy Scout chapters in the area. So asking, like requesting a meeting with their troop leader and talking to them. So kind of negotiating ways you can source volunteers from different leaders. So like I mentioned, schools, going in, talking to a teacher who's in charge, going to a university, talking to someone who's in charge of the service learning at those institutions, and also using social media. This was a little redundant in some areas. I apologize. So when you do recruit, what do the volunteers need from you when you're recruiting them? Well, generally, they need to know what's the purpose. So the purpose of the volunteer opportunity needs to be clear to them. Secondly, you need to be clear on what roles and tasks they'll be required to do. So, letting them know what goes into that volunteer opportunity. And related to that, they need to know what's the commitment. So if you're asking somebody to be on a board, you need to let them know, how often does the board meet? How often, aside from meetings, how often would I be spending time working on stuff related to this board? What kinds of things would I be doing? And finally, it needs to connect to their motivations. So when you advertise, making it clear what benefits someone can get from it, either the material or non-material, you can definitely incorporate both, is really important. So like if I was the Red Cross, I would say help people, donate blood, save some lives, and also you get a t-shirt, right? So we're going to look at some examples right now. So this is an example from volunteermatch.org. I sound like I'm a paid employee of them with how many times I'm plugging them. But essentially there is a website. There's also a website called meetup.com where you can advertise. But this one's more volunteer focused. And this is one way you can get your opportunities out here. So I just wanted to take a minute and have you all read this and tell me, what do you notice about this advertisement? And you can either say it or type it.
I like that they start out with a question. Do you like? And immediately it catches my interest because I might like that. Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I want people to have access to nutritious and healthy food. So I mentioned earlier, right, that food insecurity is something that I care about, right? So if I'm reading this, I'm like, oh, that directly connects with my belief. Yeah, great, thank you. What
I
else?
liked the use of you too, so it made it very personal and welcoming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like they're talking to you already, right? Morgan says it's engaging and specific. The volunteer shift is clearly outlined. Yeah, so down here it tells you exactly what the shift would look like. You can expect to work 4 hours on Fridays, right? On the bottom here. I almost pointed as if you all could see that. But then off to the side, off to the right, you can see it tells you where it is. So I'm reading this and I'm like, oh, that's very close to me because I put my my zip code in and I'm like, wow, okay, I could do that. I'm available Fridays. It also tells you what skills you would need or develop as the result of this opportunity. So they want you to multitask. So you develop those skills, you develop your people skills, you would build relationships, which is appealing to affiliation, right? And also you'd be problem solving. And when it says good for, it's telling you what groups would this be best for. So this one's particularly saying people 55 plus. So essentially retired individuals in that stage of life. And under requirements, it's kind of like, okay, well, what do you need from me? Well, I would need to do a background check. Okay, I can do that. I need to be 18. Okay, check, I'm double that. Orientation. Okay, so I need to attend a training. Oh, that's good to know, because then that tells me that I'm going to be empowered to do well, because they're going to tell me what I need to do. And then, oh, okay, ability to lift 40 pounds. I'm not sure about that one. So maybe this one isn't the one for me, right? But it does tell me what would be expected of me so I can make that decision. Up top, it tells you what causes you would be working towards, which connects to your values, right? So, oh, advocacy and human rights, great. I care about that. I care about eliminating hunger, and I also care about immigrants and refugees. So, yeah, this looks like a pretty good opportunity for me. And maybe if I don't think I can lift that 40 pounds, I might reach out to them and say, hey, can I still work with you if I can't do this? So then it helps you as the volunteer negotiate your needs. So let's look at another one. What do you all notice about this flyer? And this is just a flyer, so you can create flyers. Hey, Morgan says it's a call to action. Yeah, it starts with, we need you, right? To build a more inclusive workforce, we need you. And I think someone earlier mentioned, right, that the use of saying we, like you, is more welcoming and inviting. So what else do we notice about this flyer? Yeah, great, Joanne. So Joanne says they mentioned movement, which shows that you're part of a larger picture. Yeah, that we're all affiliated. We're all in this together. Rebecca, great point. So one thing I love about this particular flyer is it offers you different levels of participation. It gives you, if you want to be more short term, that's okay. If you only have 1 hour to spare, here are some things that you can do in that 1 hour. If you have a day to spare, this is what we can use you for. And, if you have 2 years to be a longer term volunteer, here's some stuff you can do. You can mentor some students. So it tells you, right? It tells you what you can, it gives you options. So one thing I would suggest, when you're advertising your volunteer opportunities, think through what are some short-term things you could use help with, what are some more longer-term things, and then advertise all of those. That way you essentially give somebody a menu of opportunities. Now, something else that I appreciate about this flyer is it tells you, because of you, students will. So it's telling you the benefits of your involvement. They'll complete internships because of you. More students will graduate college because of you. Students will begin careers because of you. So it's very clearly demonstrating to the potential volunteers what the impact of your work can do. So that really ties back into the people who like to see a direct impact of their work. So now we're going to get into an activity, and I don't expect that everyone is going to be able to follow this or use this link. So we'll do it together, but I'm going to go ahead and paste this link in the chat. It's a worksheet. We're about to do the top half of it. But if you don't want to do the worksheet or cannot do the worksheet right now, I'm going to open it and we'll just work on it together, or we'll review it together. But this is what you can fill out. You can make a copy and keep it for yourself. I'll also be giving this to Lindsay for as a companion piece with this presentation for those of you watching this as a recording. But essentially, I have this worksheet where we're going to start thinking through our own organizations. So we're going to start with just page 1, so don't look down to page 2 just yet, but we're going to look at volunteer recruitment. So start thinking through, what are some tasks related to your volunteer work that you could use help with? And someone's using this form, so that's great. So we have graphic design. Did it give you the option to make copies or no? It should have, and I'm sorry if it did not. Am I in your copy, perhaps? So if you want to type in the chat or tell me as well, we'll just take about a minute just thinking through what are some tasks that you could use help with. So whoever's writing in this one wrote graphic design, which I think is a great one to think about. Okay. So Rebecca says newsletter. So feel free to write these down for yourself. Morgan says social media. Molly says writing articles for the newsletter. Joanne says attending housing justice meetings and reporting back. Event planning, outreach. Okay, these are great. So let's move into, Jane says developing website content. So what kinds of skills, knowledge, or abilities would you need from a person to be able to do these things? Rebecca says creativity. Okay. So
I think
if I were,
oh, sorry.
no, go ahead, Deborah.
I think for like the things like social media, the graphic design, the newsletter content, especially if it's electronic, you need somebody who's got access to not only the literacy on using the programs, but who has access to programs. So
Yeah.
I know Canva, but it's free to a point, or websites are free to a point. But yeah, so that's one of the needs.
Yeah, so the ability to navigate different graphic design websites, I would say. So I would say maybe if I were posting this, I would say something like, are you a creative person? Do you want to develop your social media marketing skills? Then come volunteer for us. There are so many students, right, in particular, who really want to be in that field. And I mean, Portland State has a top graphic design program that could appeal to a lot of different folks, right? Jane writes writing skills. So do you like to write? Or are you interested in journalism? Here's a newsletter opportunity. So related to the tasks you just noted, what are sources of volunteers? So like, where should you target your recruitment, do you think? And Joanne, to what you just wrote, I would maybe write something like, because you're saying being able to interact comfortably with people different. Would you like to meet new people? Do you care about diversity, equity, and inclusion? Do you care about houselessness or making a difference in people's lives? Well, come join us. Requirements? Well, we need you to join us weekly. And we would need you to be there in person. So really clarifying what reliability looks like to you and your organization. Okay, Jane says you're recruiting retirees. Okay. Joanne's saying houseless advocacy groups, renters' rights groups, groups that advocate for seniors, people with disabilities, foster youth, and other housing insecure people. That's great. There's a lot of different coalitions, right, that you can tap into because those are volunteers. So using those as sources. Can anyone think of any other sources of volunteers? So one big source of volunteers that I would probably say would be for some of the stuff that you mentioned, for like social media, savvy folks, you'd probably defer to youth more often for that. So if I were needing help with graphic design or newsletter help, I'd maybe look at contacting perhaps like journalism classes or graphic design classes. So I would look more towards students for the more tech savvy stuff. So Jane, you mentioned more that you would look at professionals who are already serving seniors. Absolutely. There's a lot of people in that sector, right, who can provide their expertise to you by giving you guidance related to their field. So if I were recruiting to them, I would ask stuff like, oh, how do you want to really give us your perspective, share your expertise with us? So I'd really play up that they're an expert and that you need their expertise, because working professionals like to hear that, right? They like that esteem. They like feeling helpful. So go ahead and think through, and I want to see everybody write one in the chat. What's one goal that you can set to reach out to a potential volunteer? It just has to be one, but think through like what's one goal you can set. Like say 2 months from now, you're thinking back on this presentation. What's one goal that you want to have met? Okay, Tracy's wants to have a name of the village, logo, and banners done. Okay, so who do you think you could reach out to for that? So Jane says recruiting additional volunteers for communication. Okay. Rebecca, I think that's a fantastic idea. Essentially challenging each person who's already working with you to reach out to one person, because that personal connection really helps build your networks. Morgan's talking about expanding networks, so making contacts at colleges that you can pass volunteers opportunities to. Yes, and I will say I am a contact you can reach out to. I work under the Hatfield School of Government, which is a lot of public service oriented folks. So if you have opportunities you want sent out to the graduate students in those programs, I can send those out. Molly says posting something on Nextdoor, asking for a newsletter writer. I think that's great. Do keep in mind the best practices. And then Tracy says that you've been in contact with local community colleges, but classes are in finals, etc. right now. Yep, they sure are. So in about 2 weeks, they'll have a whole new batch of students that you can tap into. Back into it, because basically now we're going to okay, Joanne, that's cool. You're going to do a meet and greet. Great. So basically, now that you've thought about recruiting volunteers, we're going to think about how are we going to show our appreciation to them. So how are we going to retain our volunteers? So basically, volunteers like to feel appreciated, right? So this section will cover 2 different elements. So we're going to talk about volunteer appreciation, and then also how to organize and essentially stay in touch with your volunteers. So what do you all do already to show appreciation to your volunteers?
We're so very new, but I try to thank everybody profusely and just let them know that I really appreciate their efforts.
That's great. Yeah, I think that verbal affirmation, as Morgan calls it, I love that term. That's huge. Just telling them. I know that I just feel good when someone thanks me. Joanne says a thank you email. That's excellent. And then debriefing with food. I love that. Everyone loves food, and it's a time to relax and have fellowship with each other. Yeah. So how do you all, well, let's start there, and then we'll get into how we're organizing things. So yeah, volunteer appreciation. Here are some very, I would call low stakes, low funds ways of showing your appreciation. So first off, just writing thank you cards. Just thanking people, maybe giving a gift as a token of appreciation. Sometimes, like for example, that t-shirt is an example of a gift, right? So sometimes people will be able to give out like a gift, or like a t-shirt, keychain, something that doesn't cost a lot of money, but shows, hey, I appreciate you. This is a token that says you've served us and we appreciate that. Oh, cool. Lindsay's saying that the theater company gives free tickets for performances. That's neat. So essentially giving you access to art. Um, So another way, like you all have been talking about, is verbal appreciation. That goes so far with people, especially people who do it for affiliation or esteem. So it feels good to be thanked and appreciated. And often that's an overlooked element of volunteerism, believe it or not, is that just simply expressing gratitude. If you can swing it, organizing volunteer appreciation events, like having an annual like dinner where you like have a pizza party for everybody. Doesn't have to be that expensive. Maybe you could even get donations from people, but having some kind of event that's specifically geared towards just thanking everybody in the room. And you can also issue certificates of appreciation. So just printing out a certificate that thanks people and presenting it to them. Um, I've received those and it feels really good. One other thing that, oh, Joanne, you actually just read see, this is why you should be my co-presenter. So personalizing the thank you. So one element of giving somebody a thank you, especially if you're doing like a certificate or a thank you card, is if you are tracking what that person's putting in to the organization. So if you track, like, say a person's done 5 2-hour shifts with you, you can then write in the thank you card, thank you, you have contributed 10 hours to our organization. Or I've seen with like food banks, the thank yous I get from that, they have like some kind of formula where if you work like 1 hour, that's so many pounds of food you distribute to people. So say each person you distribute food to gets like 15 pounds of food, and then they calculated that like 60 people got 15 pounds of food that day in the hour that you were working. I should not have made that complex because I can't tell you, let's say 30, because that's easy for me to say. Oh no, it'd be about 900 pounds of food, I think, if you did 60. So then they could say, you helped us distribute 900 pounds of food. Like, how cool. Thank you so much. So personalizing their impact, letting them know that impact, or because of you, this family is able to eat for a week or something. I'm just geared towards food insecurity because, like I said, that's the one that I care a lot about. All right, so let's get into volunteer organizing. So currently, how do you all keep track of your volunteers? So if someone says, hey, I'm interested in volunteering with you, how are you all keeping track of those folks?
We just have a very basic spreadsheet right now, but we know we will be importing that into a database in the future.
Okay, that's great. That's a great start. Very great start. And I try to keep my recommendations as low tech as possible because I don't want to ever assume that people can afford that kind of stuff. But yeah, there are softwares you can purchase if you're an organization that has the resources that help you keep track of those things. Tracy said using a spreadsheet. Morgan says, yep, having a spreadsheet. Lindsay says an email marketing platform. Okay, yeah, that's the kind of software, right? So you can keep, there's one called like MyEmma where you can essentially keep track of all these people's info. But when we talk about making a database, let's just pretend we only have spreadsheets, and that is okay. That is totally fine. The primary elements you would want in a database that's out of a spreadsheet would be, you would want to make sure you have the volunteer contact information. If you get someone who's interested in volunteering, you want to ask them what kind of availability they have. So depending on your organization's needs, if you have more like one-time or short-term volunteer opportunities, especially one-time volunteer opportunities, you may want to keep track of their general availability. So for me, I'd probably say Sundays are really good for me. So Sunday 9 to 5 is when I'm available. And you'd also want to keep track of the tasks that someone likes to do and also their interests. So if I need somebody to make a flyer for me, then I can consult my database and go, okay, who's interested in creative projects? Who's interested in graphic design? And then I can call them up and say, hey, we need this. Can you help? And also, you can also think through, like when you're thinking through time commitment, like something like making a flyer, right? A person can do that at any point in a day, right? So then that would appeal to the people who work behind the scenes but are still contributing to your organization. So here is and this is a software, but you can definitely create this in a spreadsheet. Here's just an example of what a database could look like. So it has what days these people are available. It also tells you what skills interest them. And it also is keeping track of when they volunteered. So then when you go back to do volunteer appreciation, you can then track, okay, so Kate worked with us in February and twice. So I'm going to thank Kate, and when and you know, this just says program name, but it would tell you the name of the event if you're keeping track. So I'm at the end of the year, I'm going to thank Kate specifically for donating 4 hours of IT to our organization. Okay, so we're going to go back to that worksheet now. Because now we have a second element to it. So we're just going to think through, how do we show our appreciation to our volunteers? Oh, Joanne, that's a good point. So Joanne says you might want to add a section essentially saying whether or not someone actually showed up. That way, you know, if you need backup volunteers. And in general, I think it's always good to have some backup volunteers. I've personally been a backup volunteer in some situations where I had to actually step in, and that helped me know to be available during those times. So let's get into it. Tell me, what helps you feel valued as a volunteer? How, you all are volunteers, right? What's helping you feel valued? Rebecca says a sincere thank you. Yeah, me too. I love a good affirmation. Tracy says to acknowledge shared goals. Great. So acknowledging that you all are working together. You're all in this together. Morgan says when the coordinator remembers something specific about what you contributed. So essentially saying, hey, I see you and I know that you did this. And that is something I appreciate. Yeah. Adding that specificity is great in a card, right? Joanne says not feeling taken for granted. Yeah, sometimes volunteer coordinators do have the attitude that volunteers have nothing better to do. They will act like that, and those kinds of opportunities make me not want to be involved. When they act like they're doing you a favor and that, you know, they could care less if they couldn't care less that you're there, that's hurtful, right? So flipping that and showing appreciation. All right. So you all mentioned some strategies already, but based on this discussion, what are some strategies you are thinking of that you can implement in your organizations to help people feel appreciated and valued? So based on what I presented, like what's feasible for you? What's doable in your organizations? All right, Joanne says more social gatherings. Yeah. Rebecca said today even you visited businesses in the neighborhoods and thanked them for their time. I think that's wonderful. Morgan saying having more social gatherings. Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's funny you all are mentioning that because that's the one that I'm realizing because I'm on a board and I'm actually president, and I was thinking, wow, we're not doing enough to just gather and just enjoy each other and thank each other. But that helps, especially if you're in it for that affiliation, for that networking. You don't always want to feel like you're constantly working, right? You want to just have moments to just relax with each other and just be human with each other. All right, so let's get into one last thing. List one goal. What is one goal you all would like to achieve related to your volunteer appreciation? All right, Joanne says campaign sharing in a social setting. Great. Jane says getting together in person at least quarterly. Yeah, that's a goal that I'm trying to set with my organization. Morgan saying setting the goal of every volunteer gets an appreciation card. Rebecca says staying aware that you need to do it. Yeah, that's huge, right? Because sometimes we just get so busy, we forget to do that. Molly, I love that idea to thank people in the newsletter. That's huge, right? And you already have that as something that people are engaging with. So you're just giving them a public thank you. That's wonderful. Tracy says they have created a solution for needed service. Yeah. Oh, Joanne, that's great. Making sure that when you're running grant funds that you're providing essentially funding to reduce barriers to participation. Yeah, as someone who I also study social equity, those are huge, right? So making sure people have access to childcare when they're at your event, have access to transportation. Great. Those are all great ideas. I also realized because it's so dark here, I just look like a floating head now. I don't know if anybody sees that, but it's kind of funny to me. And I just saw myself on video and it's like black on black. Okay, so that's the end of this session. So I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen and just pause for any other questions or comments that you have. You all have been such a wonderful group. I really appreciate all the feedback you've been giving.
Diane, this is
Yeah.
Rebecca.
Mhm.
So you mentioned earlier there were some software resources to track volunteerism, I guess would be the word. So is there like a certain program or something that you have in mind, or?
Yeah, so I was thinking of a very hardcore one known as Salesforce, but I'll do some digging and I'll pass along to Lindsay a list of some of these links, because I was going to pass on the link to Volunteer Match and other things. So I'll look into that more and see if I can find some more reasonably priced softwares.
Thank you.
What other questions can I answer? Yeah, Joanne's saying that you rely too much on email communications. You need to meet more, but there's issues with Zoom fatigue. Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that and agree. And commuting too burdensome. I would say, I've had mixed success with offering hybrid meetings. That way, if people don't want to be on Zoom, they can come. Another option for that could be one time when you meet in person, and then the second time you meet, the next time you meet, do it online. So kind of alternating. But yeah, hybrid would be essentially having Zoom open in a room where people can still participate, but then you have people in person. That's kind of difficult to manage, I'll be honest, but it is one way that people can still participate if they're not able to get across town or whatever to an in-person meeting. I'm going to leave my email address in the chat, so you can let me know if you have volunteer opportunities you want me to send off to folks, or if you have follow-up questions that you're not thinking of right now, which that's okay. I'm kind of putting you on the spot. That way you can reach out if something does come up. Oh, thank you, Morgan. I really appreciate that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you, Diane, for this wonderful presentation. I will be sending out a link to the recording to everyone who registered. And make sure to join us next Wednesday at 6 p.m. for a follow-up presentation on event planning, also with Diane.
Yay.
Have a wonderful evening.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.